So hello, my name is Simon Wallace. I am one of the members of the Consultancy Specialist Group committee. Also from the committee we have Alan Moore, who should be up on your screen. He is the chair of the group. And we also have Antonio, another one of the committee members. And Antonio today is working the buttons and he'll be fielding or is keeping an eye on your questions and comments. So I'll introduce Martin. Martin White talking today about managing expectations, achieving harmony between client and consultant. He is the managing director of Intranet Focus Limited and also a visiting professor of the Information School at the University of Sheffield. He set up Intranet Focus in 1999 after around 20 years of consulting experience in IT and telecom. In Europe and in North America. He works primarily in information management assignments, and he's the author of 10 books and a fellow of the BCS and the Royal Society of Chemistry. And I know he has plans to tell you some more bio information about himself in his talk. So he's got some very interesting insights into his background. So I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to not spoil the fun and hand over to Martin. So Martin, it's over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. As I find, I hope successfully, the first slide. Are we up there, Antonio? Yeah.
We can see you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for either having an early supper or having a supper that you will anticipate having at the end to listen to me this evening. I'm delighted to have the invitation from Alan, Antonio, and Simon to talk this evening. And I bring greetings from the Information Retrieval Specialist Group of the BCS to the Consultancy Specialist Group of the BCS. So I am members of both, I should say. So I'm here tonight to share experience. I'm certainly not here to say the way I do it is the best way or why aren't you doing it my way. And I'd love nothing more than for someone to say, we've tried it that way, it doesn't work. What makes you think it does? So I hope that I can learn as much from you this evening as hopefully you may learn from me. Now I've got a collection of F's after my name. That's not the complete collection, but I started off being a chemist. I wasn't a very good chemist, so I had to do something else. So I turned into a consultant. But the chemistry is useful because a lot of my work is with the pharmaceutical industry and they haven't got to explain what drugs and clinical trials are all about. Fellow with the BCS, and Simon noted, and quite why I've got that I'm not sure, because you never want to let me get anywhere near a server or a network, but nevertheless thank you to the BCS. And perhaps the more unusual one is I'm an honorary fellow of the Chartered Institute of Libraries and Information Professionals, and by profession I'm an information scientist. And you'll get a sense of that, I hope, this evening, because my focus is on understanding how people use information. How does information flow around organizations, and how can technology help that flow? And a big element of that is understanding what users want in the way of information. And I'll be talking about a little bit about that later on. There's going to be a break about halfway through for questions. If there's anything you'd like me to clarify on the way through, do put it into chat, and Antonio will say, hold on, Martin, you're talking double Dutch. Can you get back to English? So that's a bit about me. And that's probably the most amazing slide you've ever seen at the beginning of a presentation on consultancy. Because I've been an organist 20 years longer than I've been a consultant. And you're thinking, hold on, what's all this about? But then if you looked at the subtitle of the talk this evening, is all about achieving harmony. And so I achieved my harmony both as a consultant and as an organist. Now, there's actually some interesting connections between being an organist and being a consultant. This is me on the organ of Saint-Étienne de Mont in Paris. And the thing about organs is everyone is different. Every single one is different, just like an engagement on a consulting project. Even if the labels on the stops are the same, they sound different because every building is different. And organists play the building, they don't play the instrument because it's all about the acoustics. Now, learning a new organ is incredibly challenging. just as challenging as when you walk into a client for the first time. I've been very fortunate to deputise in some cathedrals around the UK over the last few years, and it takes me about 2 hours on a Friday night in a dark cathedral just to work out what makes this organ go and how to get the best out of it. Just the same when you walk into a client for the first time. In the end, the client and the congregation or audience, depending whether you're doing a recital or service, only cares about one thing: have they had a great experience? They don't care how much effort you put into it. They don't care how many stops you've twiddled or how much noise you make. They only care about their experience. So organists are incredibly focused on thinking about what the congregation will hear, particularly when the acoustic, like St. Paul's, has got an echo of 7 seconds. So you can almost hear yourself play the verse before coming back to you. Every organ you play adds to your knowledge, and that, I think, is true of any consultancy assignment. You always want to learn from it. What did I do well? What didn't go well? So there's a constant learning process. And there's no greater pleasure than actually conquering the instrument. And I don't conquer my consulting assignments, but it's nice to have a great experience at the end. Now, we're going to put a survey up at this point in time because I like doing surveys. And the aim of this is just to get a sense of the audience. And this survey is going to just see how long you've been in the consulting business. The reason for doing this is that I think so often I've gone into an organization and not fully understood what the organization is about. So I'd be really interested if you could tick the right button, just so I have a sense of whether I'm actually talking to people who've got even more experience than I have and learned even more lessons than I have, or whether this is a relatively new area to you. Mind you, there are risks as well. A few years ago, I was let loose on the organ of York Minster, and there was just me in the cathedral and this wonderful organ, and the organist said, basically, here you are, shut it down when you go, and walk through the door that's over in that corner, pointing to the corner. So I had a great time there, shut the instrument down, walked down through a fast, getting gloomy church, a cathedral, and I came to the door and it said, this door is alarmed. Okay, now what? Well, it takes you about 10 minutes to walk around York Minster looking for other doors. And you end up at the door that's alarmed. So what's the option? Well, you've got to take a risk. And I pushed the door, and amazingly, it wasn't alarmed. It turned out that they only did that much later on in the evening. But it somewhat took the edge off an interesting evening inside York Minster. So this is me. I enjoy music. I enjoy consulting. And in the end, I like to get the audience or the organization saying, that was a great experience. So this is what I really want to talk about tonight, thinking about the client, the position they're in, what their challenges are. How are we doing for responses, Antonio? We okay?
So we have an 81% voted, which is, I think, a quite good participation. Well, as it's increasing, we have already 27 out of 32 people.
Right.
And one note, I forgot to add a section for the people who has no experience in consulting. So maybe some of these people that didn't vote was in that category.
Okay, so shall I move on? And you're.
Let me read the results.
Okay.
So we have that from 1 to 5 years, we have 35% of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Between 6 and 10 years, we have 11%. Between 11 and 15, we have 14. And then is distributed. We have a couple with over 40 years.
Wow.
And then is distributed more or less evenly between 6 and, I would say, between 6 and 21 in 30 years is distributed evenly.
Okay.
going to close the polling now.
Right, so I'll move on.
I think I can share the results.
Oh, right, thank you. You can tell we haven't practiced this. Antonio, you're doing a great job. Okay, that's interesting. So, yeah, there's a significant majority who've not had a huge amount of consulting experience. In that case, I hope that some of the stuff I'm doing is of interest to you. So, let's move on. This is Jed. And Jed is sitting in a project office, very high up indeed. Actually, he's sitting there with me. This is the United Nations building in New York. And we were there in 2008. Sadly, we were the other side of the building, so we didn't get a view of New York. We got a view of the Bronx. But nevertheless, it was quite an experience. And it was a highly sensitive engagement, such that it won't even appear in my autobiography when I write it. But it actually started in 2001 when I was working with this small team inside the International Monetary Fund. Now, this project actually started on the 10th of September. And if you can do conversions into American date format, you'll realize this was one day before 9/11. So we were in Washington on 9/11. And we were reporting to the gentleman on the left-hand side, Dr. Sue Choi, who was the deputy head of IT. Somehow, and I won't bore you with how we got the job and what we were doing there, but somehow we actually managed to finish the project on time in December. As a result, when Sue Choi became a deputy assistant secretary at the United Nations, he asked me to go and work for him, hence why I was in the United Nations with a colleague. And all the protocols about doing quotations were just put to one side. He was so impressed with how we handled ourselves under that challenging situation, he thought this is a safe pair of hands. And after that, I went to work for the World Bank, and after that, I went to work for the Caribbean Development Bank, all because I'd managed to achieve what they wanted, and he was very happy to pass the word on. And the next survey is really part of what I'm talking about this evening. So Antonio is going to ask you sort of what percentage of your business you get from either more work in the same organization, or where the client is so pleased with you that he says to, or she says to someone, hey, you've really got to use these people. It's the title is correct, it's Business Game, because my objective is to do such a good piece of work for a client that they are very happy to say to someone, if you want a good piece of work done on information management, go and talk to Martin White. And to do that, I have to achieve a very high level of excellence. It's, as you're filling this poll in, we also found ourselves on 9/11 being the first people inside the IMF who knew about the disaster that was happening in New York, because the phone rang in our project office at just after 8 o'clock, and it was Kiki, who's the young lady to the left. It was her partner in London saying, hey, do you know what's happening in New York? And explained that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And yeah, this was going to be quite something. So we called Elaine, who's the nice lady in the red suit, and said, hey, Elaine, given what's happening in New York, should we cancel the project meeting this morning? And she said, gee, what are you going on about? Well, a plane's hit the World Trade Center. Oh, gee, you Brits have such a strange sense of humor. Elaine, go and look at a television set. And we were the first people to know inside the IMF. And it was a very interesting time to try to handle a project under these conditions. You don't know when you're going to get home or if you're going to get back again. So how much do you think of your business do you get from extensions or referrals from clients? Because I think this is a way of saying, for me, assessing the quality of the work I'm delivering. And I expect everyone to be about the 100% mark. How are we doing, Antonio?
We have 69% of the votes. I'm going to close the vote now. are going to share the results. So we have 2 high votes. You have
Wow.
the 2 most votes are going between the 11 and 10% and 20%, and between the 70 and the 80. The
Right.
2.
That's very interesting, because I think when I'm working with other people who are consultants, or when I'm at the information school and I teach about consulting there, what I try to say is the best way to get business is to do a great job and let them be your salespeople. Because I'm not really a salesman. So if someone else can sell me, that's just fantastic. So thank you for that. Let's see if we can increase the percentage along the lines as we go along tonight. So here are my ground rules. I have 7 ground rules when I set up Intranet Focus, and you need to understand these to know sometimes where I'm coming at. I only work in areas where I have business experience. So a lot of work in chemistry, pharmaceuticals, engineering. I decided I'd never work for central or local government because they can't afford my fees. I never work to a scope decided by a procurement department. I don't do fixed fee or any type of work where someone else has decided what they want me to do. I tend only to work on a fixed fee basis. And I'm in the position that since I'm only one of 3 people in the world that do the work I do, I can choose which projects I work on. I always ask for a meeting with the project sponsor. I have had so many disasters early in my life where the project sponsor was invisible. It's now a condition of me working on a project that I see the project sponsor before I start work. And I always smile, because it makes other people wonder what you know that they don't. And I like to keep people on their toes. I enjoyed working at Logica. I was heading up one of their telecoms consulting practices. And 2 things I learned there have stayed with me to this day. The first is that we have to distinguish between fitness to specification and fitness to purpose. And so this is why I refuse to work on a spec that has been through procurement, because that will be a specification and that doesn't deliver fitness to purpose. And Logica were very insistent that delivering the outcome that's fit for purpose is more important than delivering project profit. They didn't mind if I didn't make a profit on a job or the gross revenue that was expected, because they worked on the basis if you've done a great job, the profit will eventually come. And that takes a lot of stress off a consultant, knowing they haven't got to now report at the end of the year on how much profit they've actually done. My son's a consultant and he goes through that hell every quarter or so. So this is the area I work in. It's where information science meets IT. And most of my work is about helping people decide what technology they want to work in their knowledge management areas. So I'd like to focus on the Neophyte Client. And I think this is a very important piece of learning I discovered over the years, that when you walk in and talk to your client contact, is that they may not have managed a consulting project before, or if they have, it isn't in the company they're now in. They may not have managed a project of a particular scale. I did a project for Boehringer, which involved 176 interviews in 9 languages. It was a major piece of project management. And the person I was working for learned a lot from that process, but they'd not handled a project of that size. They may well not have taken the decision to engage you. It may have been taken by someone else. And the project may be positive, it could be negative to their career prospects. They've probably never worked with you before, and they've still got to do their day job. And I think my experience says I have to get to know all those aspects of the consultant immediately, within a few minutes, because I want to begin to understand what's driving their responses, what's driving their interests, and how I can best work with them. Because, For many people, I think, as someone inside the company, a consulting project is a big black cloud. Oh my word, I've got someone I don't know taking me to pieces. What's this going to mean to me? How am I going to manage them? And I think we have to get inside them and understand this before we do anything about displaying our toolkits. I loved the diagram on the left-hand side. You can see a 6 or as a 9. I think that's wonderful. And I think so often this is a situation we find in consulting environment. I'd like to point you in the direction of Edgar Schein. I don't know whether you've read any of his books, but I do like this particular quote of his. We live in a pragmatic problem-solving culture in which knowing things and telling others what we know is valued. Having to ask is a sign of weakness or ignorance. And Schein is an absolutely brilliant writer of consulting books. And I don't know if any of you have read his book, Humble Consulting, but that's been very much, this is 2016. This is very much what I try to emulate. And he's really trying to understand what the client is telling them and why they're telling them and what the context is, rather than me coming in and I've got this wonderful toolkit and you're just going to be so impressed with my suit and my tie and the way I know my way around the organization. If you haven't read it, it's a fascinating book and you can now download it free of charge, I think, as a PDF. He's brilliant. He's still alive. I think he's about 93. His books are absolutely first rate because he comes at it almost from a cognitive psychology perspective, not from a consulting perspective. So what are we going to talk about tonight? These are the 6 concerns that I find I face so often when I'm on a consulting assignment. The initial one, how can both of us win, the client and the consultant? Scope creep. Why are we paying you this much money? What about the risks? How are we going to get the users involved here? And how are we going to keep a track of the project? So up to sort of next 15 minutes or so, I'll deal with the first 3 and then we'll take a break. So how can we build a win-win relationship? Most of the pictures in this presentation are mine. This is a picture of a wedding in La Rochelle, France. And unlike the UK, where the bride appears mysteriously from the back door, and I can tell you as an organist, I'm very good at weddings. In France, the bride and the bridegroom spend a lot of time bringing people together. They want it to be one huge, great party. Whereas, of course, in the UK, the first thing we do when we walk into the reception is have to explain why on earth we're there, which in my case is usually, hello, I'm the organist. I think the first meeting agenda is absolutely crucial. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I think each of us has about 5 minutes to prove how this relationship is going to be. And the number of times I've used my interest as an organist as a way of just starting off on a neutral area, it works a treat. And I'm sure you've got some similar examples, because I try to stay away from the process of being a consultant and convince them, actually, I am a human being. One of the things that I do try to get very early on is to agree how the whole progress and comms is going to be managed. These are things that often a neophyte client hasn't really thought through. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I do walk into that first meeting very ready to listen, but always having some clear objectives as to what I want out of the meeting. Now, you are all experienced consultants. You're not going to look at the left-hand side of this and learn anything new. This happens to be Logica's sequence, but there are many similar ones. One of the problems I try to work out very early on is who is going to manage the project. I've had too many clients assuming that I am going to run the project for them. So when it comes, for example, to choosing who to interview, oh, well, you should go and see Fred and Harry and Josepha and whatever. And you can set up the meetings and tell them what you're going to do and all that. But they don't understand what's involved in overall running the project. And apart from everything else, they're pretty busy on their day job at the same time. So early on, I try to work out who is doing what in the various stages of the project. And actually, you know, be very open with, I can do that for you, but I really would like you to take responsibility for this. So it's trying to get this balance between, yes, I bring skills, but they're at your service, and let's see if we can work on this together. Because I'd like you, the client, to be a hero. The next thing we tend to have to cope with is scope creep. This is one of my reports you can see on the right-hand side, which is sometimes, I try hard not to imitate. It actually is some plain song. You'll find musical illusions all the way through this presentation. Sorry about this. And I had a major problem at the IMF because no one had quite thought what they wanted the report to be. And in the course of 3 months, I wrote over 85,000 words of project report because the client kept on changing their mind. They wanted an initial draft, they wanted an interim report, and then they wanted an interim before the final report. And one of the things I found is that if I can focus on the report, I can manage the scope creep. How do I do that? Basically, I work back from the report. So I define the scope of the project in terms of the report. Who's going to read it? What do they already know? And as I'll come back to later on, what decisions are they going to take, having read the report? And often I find that the person who is my contact in the company doesn't know the answers to any of those 3 questions. But when I was working for Hoffmann La Roche about 10 years ago, I was asked to write, I think, 6 reports on various aspects of their information management environment. And I could see that this was going to be a challenge. And so this is the approach I now adopt. I work quite early on with a set of headings for the report, and I notionally allocate whether it's going to be half a page, or perhaps 3 pages, what the headings might be. And above all, where are we at? We're about 15 pages. What are they expecting in this report? Well, it's going to senior management. It probably needs to be at 15 or 20 pages, something like that. And I use this as a way of managing the scope. Now, there will be changes because certain topics may come into play and certain topics are taken out. But the bottom says it's about 15 days, 15 pages. I'll give you 20, but if we're starting to get to 40, we need to have a discussion about scope creep. And I keep this as a constant document that I share every week or so, or whatever is appropriate, because I find this focuses the mind of the client on what they actually want as the outcome of the project. They don't want my brains, they don't want my insight, they don't want my charming anecdotes about organs. They want a report that helps them make a decision. So this is actually a real report. I think it ended up about 18 pages. It doesn't matter. But I use this to come up with 6 report formats. And the client then got exactly what they asked for. Yeah, you know, occasionally we had a little discussion about, I thought you were going to cover this. But it really helps me define the scope right from the beginning. If you define it in terms of objectives, like we want to find the best way to handle mergers and acquisitions and the exchange of knowledge, that's far too vague. Let's get it down onto a report. And I found this has worked quite well for me over the years. And as I say, tried it with Hoffman LaRoche, and it kept me sane, having to write 6 reports in round about 6 weeks. So what I want to move on to now is this question of value for money, because always there's the question of, yeah, but you're charging X thousand a day, you must be incredibly rich. No, there's a few expenses to come out of that, please. And I have a couple of approaches that I try to use to understand what the perception of the value is to the client compared with what they think they're paying. And at the end of this, I'm going to have a break after 3, and you can throw some questions at me. This is Rupert. He's an ace auctioneer. He's very, very good at getting the maximum return on the investment at 2Vs. He's also not only a brilliant auctioneer, he's also a priest in the Church of England, which is an interesting collection of skills. And we've met together when he's been doing the wedding and I've been playing the organ. That's why Rupert's up there. The links with organs are all over the place here. But he really understands how to look at a group of people in his auction room and decide how he's going to put the price in and how he's going to maximize the return. And I tend to focus on 2 particular ways of having a discussion with the client about what their perception is of the value of what I'm doing. And I'm going to present a couple of them here. One is what I call decision-focused value. Decisions are workflows. And this is a brilliant piece of work by a good friend of mine, Charles Citroen, published in the International Journal of Information Management, as you can see, in which he investigated how senior board-level managers in companies made decisions. It was in Holland, and he talked to people in banking and pharmaceuticals and something else I can't remember. But what he uncovered was actually decisions have a workflow, particularly in the Netherlands, where they tend not to go down the American I feel it in my gut approach. And a lot of what I then do as I'm working on an engagement is try to understand what the workflow is that will then take my report, because I'm really in the A and B area, doing the analysis, providing some information. What are the next steps? And what's the impact going to be of those steps on the organization? So that we get past this, we want you to write a report because the board needs to make a decision on, but what is the decision? Is it possible to give them what they want within the scope of the project, or should we actually go ahead and try and persuade them to extend the project? Do it in some 2 or 3 phases rather than a big bang approach. And I find focusing on the decision that has to be made out of the report also helps define what the scope is going to be. And in particular, as I'll come on to after the break, who I'm going to talk to get the information I need to write that report. The other approach I find useful is risk reduction. Whenever I walk into any organization, I already know, because I've read them, the operational risks the company faces, because they're always presented in the annual report. They have to be signed off by the board. And I find that using these risks shows my potential, or my client, that I understand the business, I understand the pressures on the business, and then I can start to talk about, well, yeah, but how do we want to move this engagement to reduce the risk? So I have another way of trying to get them maybe to extend the report, extend the engagement, or to focus on a particular area, because I'm now starting to talk the language of the board, not the language of maybe a particular department or a particular process. So yeah, it's a bit vague, but I find these 2 approaches help me develop, particularly even in the early stages when I'm writing the proposal. What do you want this to do to your business? So that's halfway through. I've got Oh, sorry. I'll be talking about user interviews and a couple of other things after the break. But is there anything anyone would like to ask me at this stage? Antonio, you've been looking at the chat. Is anyone woken up long enough to ask me a question?
So we have Peter at the Vola. He has asked 2 questions, and I'm going to ask Peter to voice him help and explain the questions. One is regarding, sorry a second, concept of service delivery and service failure, and the other one was regarding joining professional bodies to extend more work. That is initially. I think that we have more question coming in. So first, I would like to let the word to Peter.
Okay.
Good evening. Yes, I mean, once you've done a project, there's some kind of problem about service delivery or service failure, and I don't know whether it's a concept that companies are applying to consultants that are offering them a service. Have you heard of these concepts, and do companies ask you to do performance reviews or evaluate your performance in terms of service delivery or service failure?
The quick answer is no, but I think I'm unusual because in the area I work, which is predominantly in enterprise search, there's me, there's Miles in San Francisco, and there's Agnes in Hungary, and we're the only 3 people who do this type of work at an enterprise level in big multinational companies. So I'm in the very pleasant situation of not having to justify my existence, though I absolutely understand what you're getting at in terms of this service delivery. But I've never really come across it. And one of the things that's surprised me is that I'm always working on my own. I very rarely work with anyone else. Not because I don't like them, I just don't because of my speciality. But even very big companies are very generous to me, is that, you know, we'll work hard on the engagement, make the engagement a success. But I've never really come across that, to be honest, Peter. I'm aware of the concept, but it's never cropped up in my practice.
Well, I think it does generate in what I call the service industries, because services are slightly more intangible than products. So, but yes, okay, that's good. Well, thank you so much, and well done. You've got a very nice niche market.
You're welcome to join me. You're welcome to join me.
If you've got a contact in Europe, in Budapest, put it in the chat if they would want people to reach out to them.
Okay, I'll do that for you.
Peter, did you ask the second question regarding joining professional bodies?
Well, absolutely. I mean, with BCS now, but I thought that there are, for example, in America, there's the Computing Society Association. But how about these bodies? If you want to penetrate the market, so they've got these professional bodies in the US, in Canada, in South Africa, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and New Zealand. They charge a lot of subscription monies, but do you think it's a good rate of return? Could those bodies really help you to penetrate those markets?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I'm very honoured to be a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. And that just gets me straight into pharmaceutical companies, because they know I wouldn't have got that fellowship if I wasn't a competent chemist. And they know I understand the business, they know I understand the jargon, they know that I understand the pressures on the business. So a lot of my work has been in the pharmaceutical sector. I've never directly found, and the chart that my association with the library and information professionals is helpful sometimes when I'm doing work for university libraries. But it's been that fellowship. In other words, if you like, it's the subject knowledge that I bring rather than the knowledge of consulting or of the technology. And I'd have to say I work mainly in Europe, and they've heard of the Royal Society of Chemistry, they haven't heard of the British Computer Society. They don't know where it fits in. In America, it's the American Association for Computing Machinery, and that has to be one of the most ridiculous titles for an IT association, that I've come across, though I have enormous respect for it and I'm a member. So the quick answer is, Peter, the chemistry connection has been invaluable, but I've not really had any benefits from any of my other professional bodies in the same way.
Well, that's good. So trade bodies are probably the way forward. But what about these special interest groups a lot of these professional bodies offer? Are they something for useful networking?
Well, yeah, that's why I'm vice chair and the newsletter editor for the information retrieval group, because I'm in the search business. So every time I do a newsletter every quarter, people come face to face with me and my interest in search. So, but I don't think I've ever got any work out of it. But I've got a lot of good friends.
Oh, nice one. Okay, over to the other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter, indeed. We have one other questions before maybe we can answer before going forward. More than a question, it's a comment. This is from Tim Payne. He may want to voice the question himself. Basically, is regarding that most of the business, they come from personal networks and contacts in the same business. Tim, I give you the word.
Yeah, hi. It was really just a comment. In my experience, when I've been doing consultancy, most of the new business I get comes, or sort of additional business I get, comes from the people that you're already working with. I spent a good period of time in IKEA at the last 4 years, and what I found was you did one project, then they said, oh, can we use you for another project? And then can we use you for another project? And then can we use you for another project? And that seemed to be most of the way that these sort of, don't know if it's just in the Nordics, but certainly in that area, that business was actually given out to consultants. You went in for one project, you got familiar with the client, you got familiar with their organization, and then they trusted you enough to sort of give you another project and another project and another project. And then you basically spent, instead of spending like 3 months there, which is what I originally went for, you end up spending about 5 or 6 years there, which is what I eventually stayed. So that was just a point from my experience.
And I'd absolutely agree with that. I mean, my big Scandinavian clients have been Ericsson, Atlas Copco, Novozymes. I've forgotten one, but yeah, and that's really what I'm trying to achieve. I don't, doing cold calling to get consulting projects when you're as specialized as I am is very difficult. I just don't do it. I just wait for them to find me, because I know that if they talk to someone else in like IKEA, they'll come with a reference, and I haven't got to go through the write us a proposal, and it's going to go through procurement, and we've got this cost limit. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. So thank you for reinforcing my prejudice to making clients work for me. Okay, Antonio, shall we proceed on?
Please, thank you.
I'm going to do very little on this. These are some stalks on top of a chimney in Lavos in Portugal, and I thought they got the risk well sorted. In summer, no one's going to light a fire. Clever birds. All I want to say here is that, in general, I find the line of business managers I work with have no appreciation of risk management. They don't know that it's a discipline. They don't know how it works. And I try very early on to get a discussion around what the risks are before we get too heavily involved in the project. I mean, the typical ones, I'll go through these quickly because there's more interesting stuff. But the big problem I find is the project sponsor. You just can't find them. They vanish. That's a nightmare risk. I find it more and more difficult to link into office systems. If I have to do one more project with Teams, I shall cry and go somewhere else. Because linking into SharePoint and stuff like this gets to be just so difficult. That's a big risk I face. Poor disclosure from the client. They don't have access to all the documents. They don't even know the documents are there. They don't even know how to get hold of them until I get onto their terminal and use my skills in search. The biggest risk I face, the key staff are just not around for interview. Oh, you're supposed to talk to Fred in clinical trials, but oh, he's off for a couple of weeks. I keep on finding that the client's project manager is overloaded, and then someone's come and changed the deliverables by edict. Oh, you now want you to do this. Now, you've all had these, but I make a point of building a little risk register, and I don't get into detail of scoring and stuff like this right up front. So again, with my client, we are ready to take account of these risks and come up with a plan B. That's fairly standard stuff, but I found it very important to get on the table at the beginning. I now want to spend a bit of time on user requirements, which I think may be something that's quite special now, because we've got this user orientation, the user experience in IT, meeting user requirements. And I've done a lot of work on trying to get user requirements out of people. It's rather like this street market in New York. Where do you start? Everyone's trying to tell you a different story about what's great and what's good. I'm so looking forward to getting back to New York one day and going to one of these markets. Because without all the evidence, and I think the next presentation, Antonio, in the series is about doing the research. But this is where my chemistry comes into play. Because with a chemist, you've got to be able to find the evidence and to weight the value of it and to try to work out whether there's something that's missing from the evidence that could derail the project. And this is when I get into the area of implied ethnography. I don't know whether any of you have looked at the science of ethnography. It's really coming out of social science, and it's about how we interact with people, not on a psychological basis, but in groups. And before I went into the IMF, I had the best guidebook I've ever had to a company. This is a book published in 1999 by Richard Harper, who was working at Xerox PARC at the time. And it's called An Ethnography of Documents, Technology and Organization. And this is where I work. And this book, if you haven't come across it, try to get hold of a copy, because it's how information flows around the International Monetary Fund. It's unique. No one has written a book like it since. But to me, there are all sorts of tips and tricks, some of which I'm about to tell you, about how to get inside an organization. And I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with ethnography, is to look at it and see how it might be applied in your work. I think the book is still in print, but do try and track it down. It's brilliant. I find in general, my clients are very uneasy about letting me loose in their organization, particularly since I want to do it on my own. I hate doing interviews with the client's project manager alongside me. Will they be annoyed? I find in general that when I walk into a building for the first time to talk about a project, no one has thought about how big the user interview program needs to be and how we're going to manage this. In my work, it's very difficult to do it in Germany, because German companies have workers' councils who are very concerned about information that is being gained from individuals. Another big issue is workarounds. One of my discoveries over the last 5 years is this concept of workaround. We all know they exist, but a huge amount of research has gone on to what workarounds are, how do they arise? Because often I'll go and do some user research, and what I am told is what they should be doing to do a task. But then I say, yeah, but you're very busy. How do you get through all this in the working day if you've got to do all this? No, we don't do it every working day. Actually, we just get on and do it, and at the end of the week, I try and do a catch-up. I really would encourage you to look at this theory of workarounds. It's free. Just stick it into Google. You'll find it. Because it really goes through why people start to work around, what the evidence is, how you can dig out that evidence. Because I think one of the key things I bring to a project is understanding that workarounds are not bad. Workarounds are good because they help me refine a process. And when I'm working with information flows, I have to know where these workarounds are. So that's a big bit of what I bring to my consulting practice, because I think many people are unaware that this is a big area of research and a big problem inside a digital workplace. I use personas to define the users I want to talk to. These come out of some work I did for Boehringer Ingelheim about 10 years ago or more. And these personas are the types of people that will be using the systems I'm helping the company design. You can read them across, don't bother to go down, but at the bottom, in a way, are all the fact I need access to information. My job is to find the systems and the processes to deliver that information. And if I start, these don't exist, by the way, these pictures are just stock photographs. But if I start to put these pictures and mock names in place and talk about what their interests are, then we can say, Frank, no, actually for this project, we don't need Frank. But actually, sales and marketing, we've got them as a single persona. No, we need to split that apart because the sales, that's a difficult area. So let's have a salesperson, and let's have some marketing people. So early on, I use this concept of personas to define the users I'm going to talk to. The next problem I try to solve is the fact that I'm often dealing with virtual teams around the world. And I'm dealing with multinational companies working in multiple languages. How do I set up these interviews? And when I was working at Ericsson some time ago, I developed this it's actually 2 PowerPoint slides, which I can send out in advance of me appearing on the scene, which give an overview of the project, my rules for doing the interview. I will talk no more than 50 minutes. On the back, they'll find the scope, but I'll come back to it in a minute. I never record or transcribe an interview, and I never report verbatim comments unless I've had the specific go-ahead from the person concerned. There's a picture of me, so they know when I walk through the door, hello, Martin, yes, I've seen your picture. There's a bit of background, and I even put where I live in Horsham, where I live in the UK, because no one's heard of Horsham, but they do know where Gatwick Airport is. And then on the back, I show the structure of the interview. I want to talk for about 15 minutes on decision making. I then want to understand how they collaborate. And then here are 12 ways that a digital workplace could benefit the organization I'm working in. Before we walk in the door, what are some of the ways that would make a big difference to the way you work? And I always give them a bit of time at the end as a bit of a float. I found this a very effective way of getting buy-in from the users. They feel they know who I am, what my background is. There's a commitment here to do it in a very structured way. They can prepare for that meeting. So when I walk in, I haven't got to do the, hello, my name is Martin White. I'm so pleased to come into your office today. We can get over that. We can get straight down to business. These are some of my little tricks. I'd always test the interview format. I never take verbatim notes because I find I lose eye contact. I'm fortunate I have a good memory. I might make little notes, and then I'll walk out the door and write up something longer. One of the challenges I face is that most people I speak to do not speak English as their first language. This can slow down the interviews. I have to make sure I know exactly what they're trying to get across to me. One of the tricks that I learned when I was actually working at Ericsson, a Swedish company, was that I always give my pen to the interviewee. Doesn't work in a virtual environment, but you can talk about it. I give my pen to them, basically saying, I'm not going to write any notes. What you tell me now just sticks in my brain. The key thing I've learned over the years, there's the one at the bottom. Keep the interviewee in the loop on the project progress. And this is actually me thinking about the interviewee. If they feel comfortable with how I've handled the interview, they themselves may recommend me for another piece of work. I see every interviewee as a prospective client. And if I do it that way, I respect them and I'm trying to get inside them and understand exactly what I do. If you've ever done focus groups, they're a nightmare. And this is a warning from my experience. I've had more disasters with focus groups than I care to talk about. And over the years, I've evolved this approach to them, is that I always pilot test them and I only do them when I know everyone in the group. Because if there's any one person that I don't know what their personal objective is, and the whole thing's a disaster. So I use them as a way to validate outcomes. I find that clients want focus groups up front because it's a quick way. They think of getting a lot of people together and it looks good and it gets the message across. I really do dislike focus groups. I use them in very rare circumstances. If you've not read this book by Steve Portigal, Interviewing Users, published by Rosenfeld Media in the States, I really would encourage it. When you've got someone writing 180 pages on user interviews, you realize how much there is to learn. And I've met Steve Portigal. I went to a brilliant web project management or interview management conference he gave, a training session he did a few years ago. I really would recommend this book if you're doing anything like interviewing users. So we're coming down towards the end. How do you keep track of the project? This is a sign on a building in Taval, which is a little village in Provence, in which the water for all the gardens is actually in a series of canals interconnected to a big reservoir. And I love this sign up on the wall of the building because it says exactly which buildings or which areas are going to get water on particular days. I think that's a very nice little guidance note because it never rains in this part of France. And one of the tricks I've used, I learned this at Logica, and I'm sure you've all got your own way of doing trends. I found this works a treat. If you've not come across it before, on the left-hand side, the vertical line is what you think the project plan is going to be. You start in February, the systems design is going to be in March, hardware June, software complete August, systems complete October. And then every month or every week, you do a reforecast. And the reason I use this are for the following reasons. Firstly, it puts the milestones on one piece of paper. And when I was at Logica, if you were at the office, you had to leave all your trend charts on your desk. So that if your boss walked in, or anyone walked in, even one of your colleagues, they could find out exactly what was happening on the projects you're responsible for. This is a very visible way of showing where the project is, and it's also a way of showing that you are the consistency of your forecasting. Is it all over the place? You know, one week you're saying we're going to do this, and the next week you say you're going to do that. So there's a good website at the bottom. There are many ways of doing it, Gantt charts and all sorts of things, but this is a single piece of paper, and I find it very easy to keep the client on board. So I'll end up with just some of my conclusions over the years. This is a photograph of the team trying to get Apollo 13 back to Earth. That was an amazing effort in avoiding failure. So here are some nevers. I'm going to be bold. Never assume what worked before works this time around. This comes back to the organists again. It was fantastic in Chichester Cathedral, and you played it in Guildford, and it didn't work. It didn't have the same buzz. The organ worked in a different way. And I think I've certainly done projects where I've assumed that a way I did it before were going to work a second time round. I find I have to start from basics, rather like learning an organ for this first time. I have to assume that sorry, let me start again. I never assume that I know all the relevant information, because the client often doesn't know what exists, and it's not until you go and interview and someone says, "Oh, did you see the report that we had done last year on our sales, our customer relationship database?" No. Of course, you can never say that. Remember, I smile all the time. I just get back to the project office and ask, where is it? I never try to outmove the client. I did this at the IMF, and I survived because I was having a bit of a problem with someone within the IMF. You never know who's going to listen to the recording, so I'll be very gentle. But I tried to play someone off against the other. I only did it once in the IMF. I got my wrist slapped. I've never done it since, but I've seen clients who do it. And some have done to me. I've occasionally hired consultants. And this is what it's all about, really. I never want to close out an engagement without having got an enduring relationship with a client, that I know I can use them as a reference, that they are pleased with my work, they spread the word around. I don't care if I've lost money on a project if I've got that relationship. And that's what I learned from Logica. Don't worry about the money will come to you, just deliver. And in terms of achieving success, this is Gene Kranz and his crew as Apollo 13 actually landed. It's about transparency. And I think I try to be as transparent as possible with the client. These are the problems I'm having. Look, I've read through this document, but it doesn't say quite what I was expecting. I try never to be a pawn in a game of power politics either. Identifying stakeholders is crucial. It's often not until you're way down the project you find that someone's come on board and you didn't know they had an interest in the project. I try to get that stakeholder identified at the beginning and always feel that they know what they expect from a project. If I translate that to being an organist in a cathedral, it's all very well delivering a great hymn experience for the congregation, but the clergy also are expecting something and the choir are expecting something different. So being an organist, you really have to understand what everyone's expecting from the way you play the instrument. I try hard to make sure that everyone feels they're important to the outcome of the project. I never want an interviewee to feel they're just interview fodder. I want them to feel that every single word they say is going to help me have a better outcome for them, for the project, and for the company. And I also recognize that every day may be different. This certainly happened to the IMF. Monday was fine. Tuesday, we had a global crisis on our hands. And I've had similar situations where I walked into a client and discovered that they'd actually sold one of the subsidiaries I was working with. And of course, no one knew about it until the press release was issued. And I got a copy when I walked in the morning. That was a challenge. So I hope I've just given you bits of food for thought. I hope I've entertained you a little bit. I want to say some thank yous. I've worked in some great consulting businesses over the years. You've heard me talk about Logica, but Business International gave me a gig advising the Sri Lankan government when I was only 32, 33. A huge opportunity working in Sri Lanka. 4 consultants have shaped me. Angela Abel, Howard McQueen, who was on the IMF, Steve Seek and Peter Jackson. I've learned so much from other consultants. You can never stop learning. And there's a list of clients there who taught me and allowed me to experiment. All those, I tried something new in how I was going to do the engagement. With their permission, they may have raised an eyebrow, but they let me get on with it. And in the end, I delivered. And I'm absolutely indebted to them for giving me that flexibility and not saying, this is what we expect you to do. So, time for reflection. A final set of questions. I think I'm about on schedule, Antonio. You won't believe the number of times I've rehearsed this. At the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a picture of a young lady. That's my wife. And she's looking in that direction and she's saying, if he takes one more photograph to put in his slide decks, I'm going to divorce him. This is Rockefeller Center, New York, many years ago. But the number of times that she's had to stop when I take a picture. Now, on the left-hand side is a book I wrote 3 years ago, which is really a handbook for clients, not a handbook for consultants. The idea being, this is for the neophyte consultant, the neophyte project manager, business manager who's hiring me. This is what I expect as a consultant to get a best win-win out of it. Now, there's a link there which I'm going to try to put up on the chat in a minute, because it's actually sitting on my website, and up until the 31st of March, you're most welcome to click on it, download it. It's about 130 pages, and it summarizes a fair bit of what I've been talking about tonight, but it was not written for consultants. It was written for clients, and you may find it useful to take bits and pieces out of there, because by and large, I found all the books on consulting are written for consultants. We don't need them. It's the clients that need the help, not us. So on that basis, I hope I've given you food for thought. It's been a real privilege putting this together, because I think this is the first time I've ever talked about this stuff. And I think on that basis, it's time to hand over to the bunch of people who are still there. Antonio, would you like to take back your role as chair?
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Really good presentation. I want to give the voice. I want to give the word to Tim. He have put forward a couple of comments and a couple of questions, so I just going to let him go ahead. I think the first, at least the main question that I saw was regarding, do you use things like system theory to map out the organization and how it works at high level? And I let Tim.
So let me sort of put some context around this. When I went to my first largest consulting gig was at IKEA, as I sort of said before. IKEA is a very interesting organization to work in. It's a very political organization. It's a very client sort of consultant-driven organization. And one of the things that I found was that there was what the documentation says, there was what the people says, and then there was what actually went on, and then the shadow organization. So it's just a point really that it's best to understand when you go into an organization, treat documentation sometimes as fantasy, because it doesn't always exist, doesn't always describe what actually goes on. Try and use system theory, if you're familiar with system theory, to sort of map out the high-level sort of picture of how the groups or how the power groups within the organization works, because that can give you a good idea of who you really need to talk to and who are really the sorts of stakeholders you need to please. And the last point I wanted to make was when I did my PhD, there was one book which I used as a sort of guide for doing case study analysis, which was called Case Study Research by Robert Ying, which was an extremely good book in describing how to do interviews and how to do sort of data analysis. It's more to do with research, but there's a lot of techniques and a lot of sort of descriptions in there. Some of the points that Martin covered, things like the introduction into the interview process, creating out a document saying what the interview is about. There's a lot of information in there which is useful about how to actually do successful, semi-structured fully structured and non-structured interviews, and how to sort of analyze the data in a useful way.
Tim, that's a useful comment. Are you actually sitting in some cloisters? Do you work in a cathedral in your spare time?
No, it's just a background, but yes.
I think that's very good advice. And I think that it's only really perhaps over the last 3 or 4 years I've really understood the depth and complexity of workarounds, which is really what you're talking about. Multiple ways of apparently doing the same thing. I'm not familiar enough with systems design work to use that. But it's why I only work for companies where I understand the industry. So I get a sense of how they might work, what the systems are, what the processes are. So I never work in finance, but I do work in law because I have a background in law dating back to the time I worked for Butterworth, the law publishers. And I find that gives me a bit of a fifth sense when someone's actually not that they're not telling me the truth, but they're telling me an alternate universe, and getting that out, but not being critical, saying, okay, you do it this way, this is the way that the organization is expecting you to do. Let's talk about why there's a difference and build on it, rather than, oh, I'm going to tell Fred because you shouldn't be doing that. I think workarounds are a very good way of actually understanding how a business really works. And I'm absolutely with you on your comments about, places like IKEA. I've not worked for them, but the Swedes are an interesting group of nationals.
Brilliant. I saw that you had another couple of comments, Tim. One was regarding risk and the issue where documents detail fantasy. So we have already discussed that. And the challenging the shadow organization, how it works. So I think we already commented everything. If no one else have a question, I think I do have one of my own, which is...
Oh no, please, someone else come up with a question.
So just going to ask when you were discussing, you were mentioning that focus group, or you are not really recommending focus group. Would you see that they could be interesting to get introduced to someone else inside of the organization? So, for example, inside of the focus group, you have few people that you know, and maybe you can use that to trampoline into another part of the organization and gain some familiarity.
That's a very good point. I often find that if I've got that's why I like people to know me and I know them, because they trust me and I trust them. And then they'll say, oh, you really should talk to Helmut. And then someone say, no, Helmut's not in that area anymore. You've got to go and talk to Susanna. She's the person. So the group helps you position who else you should see. And then I can go to my client and say, I've had this focus group. Everyone's saying I should go and see Susanna. But Helmut figured there. And they may say, Helmut, I'd forgotten he'd moved there. Yeah, go and talk to him as well. So I think that focus groups as a place to bring together and then embark on new areas are very good. But as a way of quickly come back to Tim, as a way of quickly understanding how an organization works, they're just a disaster, because no one will ever tell you the workarounds in a focus group because they don't want their wrists slapped.
Yeah, yeah, completely understand. Very well.
I think I could throw an observation on, I'm not sure it's a question, but an observation as well, which is, Martin, I was really impressed at your ability to have all these complex interviews without taking notes. And I have to say, I have the same confidence in my own ability, because I can have a very long, complex conversation and feel comfortable not taking any notes. And it's only the next day when I realize I can't remember anything that was said. So I'm most impressed by that. But do you have any tricks of the trade when it comes to that? I find it kind of alarming that you can try and capture all of that knowledge and information without writing it down.
Yeah, I have a trick. You're familiar with radar charts?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a radar chart on my lap or on my iPad, which has got the main thrusts of the conversation. And it might be customer experience, it might be database access, I'm going to have to make this up. And then I do a cross on each of those areas as to where that interview was particularly rich. So I can see this guy really knew about the customer management application. So I can look through these charts and quickly see whether, for example, I've got a great deal of information on one area and not on the other. And those charts link back into the report scope. So I'm just making notes to myself, and that's why I can usually then walk out, have a half-hour break, and on that same chart, add in the things I've learned from that particular interviewee. But that also leads to an interesting point, is that I always reserve the right to come back to the interviewee. I'm open with them to say, look, I may, when I write this up, realize I've not talked to you about this. Can I come back and talk to you? And again, if you want to come and talk to me. But that's one of the tricks I didn't have time to talk about tonight.
So, is there anybody else out there who's got
Yes.
observations to make before we finish?
Yes, we have a question coming from Caroline. Sorry, Caroline, I completely missed the question. Would you mind to voice and question your question, please?
Thank you so much. I found this really enjoyable presentation in the night. And I personally, I'm an academic working in universities, and I'm working on a consultancy project with a company has a completely background from what I do, and therefore they want the consultancy for knowledge purpose. But because there is this skill gap, and every time I found their sort of requirement change every week, and what I've been suggested doesn't seem to have that authority, because they still have that, still have their own structure in their mind. So how to convey a message to be confident, and how to deal with problems of changing mind all the time, and as you said, to have a good relationship, we would be more than happy to work more hours with them just to keep that relationship. But on the other hand, I find it difficult for people to appreciate what we contributed more or extra. So what's your advice on that, please?
Oh, I have mythical clients. I can tell stories about clients that don't exist in order to tell a story. Oh yeah, I remember a couple of years ago I was working out in Barbados, and it was a peculiar place. They kept on changing their minds, and it was, I was very glad there was a great beach I could go down onto in the evening and just forget all about it, because I find that if I can use a story that's not related either to, well, it might be related to me because I'm telling it about me, but not related to the organization, I can, if you like, shift it sideways and let them get the drift of what I'm trying to do. And you might say, oh, isn't that a bit unethical? No, I'm just writing fiction. Normally I write fact and a report, but I'm also good at writing fiction, and you're just hearing me in fiction mode. But if it tells a story and it gets something across, does that make any sense to you? Just sort of taking the load off you and putting it onto someone else.
That's the skill needs to learn. Is there any more reference book, because you provided many readings which I'm going to look into, but is there any tools or books regarding this aspect?
I would certainly look at the books from Howard Scheidt, the ones that I recommended there, because he comes at consulting from a people focus. And okay. I think even if you don't get an exact solution, I think it would inspire you to see the client in a different way.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would thank all of you for staying in. I hope I've shared some ideas that not necessarily you can adopt, but you can build on. It's been a real privilege to come and talk to the group, because I know I'm with people who can probably do it a great deal better than I can. So I've been through many versions of this. Particular thanks to Alan and to Antonio, who helped me enormously with reframing my original idea into something that I hope has been useful. I always offer a lifetime guarantee with my presentations, which says that you've got my email address, it's on the first slide. If you've got any questions or comments, you're most welcome at any time in the future just to ping me an email and you'll get a reply. All I'll say is, I'm getting older, don't wait too much longer.
Well, thank you, Martin. I hope you will actually be in the business for many years to come, because you clearly have a fantastic speciality and practice there. And it was wonderful to hear how you go about doing that and some of those tricks of the trade. I just wish I could emulate you, and I don't think my brain is up to that, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for chairing, and thank you, Antonio, for playing the knobs. I appreciate it.
So it's been a great session. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the questions. And hopefully I'll see you all on the 31st of March when the big How to Be a Consultant program starts. Please do sign up for that. It's going to be a wonderful thing altogether. I'm really looking forward to it. So I will see you on the 31st of March. That concludes the session for today. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.